Thank you. Okay, so this perspective, again, thank you, by the way, for the in-depth thinking around that question, and that worked out great because when we were going through that, I wasn't sure what the timing would be for that, but I felt that by the conversations that were going on throughout that was worth doing. So thank you for your involvement with that. So now we're going to step away from the question piece. We've delved into that. We reviewed before, looked at some of our initial efforts, and now we're going to get into some streamlining of the thinking of this question creation, if you will, or item creation. But before we get to that layer, we want to take a step back and just speak to this timeline piece to make sure everybody's on the same page. So this original timeline is referring to the C3 standards and kind of enveloping in the Smarter Balanced and kind of where we're at with assessment and different things. So in November 17th of 2012, the standards were released, I believe, in draft to the public. And actually, I think it was actually postponed a little bit, but there were snippets of it that were out. That was when it was originally to be released. At that point, then, you were going to get national feedback, meaning and this follows a similar pattern. So I'm talking about the C3 standards that we referenced. Same pattern was followed for for the Common Core state standards. Same pattern was followed for the Next Generation Science standards. At the end of that, the team called SASE, which our MDE representative, Jim McConnell. Jim Cameron, thank you. He's the history guy, right? Yeah. Jim Cameron, he is a member of this SASE review team, and so he would travel with the 17 or 18 other states. They would look at that public feedback, and they tried to embed that in the document. And in that work then in February, they took that feedback and did some final revisions. In March then, as it was proposed at the time, the standards were in a state where they could be released, and Michigan was possibly going to look at the potential of adopting that. However, it wasn't going to happen before the Next Generation Science Standards because those had been released prior. The Next Generation Science Standards are probably similar dates, but about a year ahead, right? So if you changed it to 2011 and then 2012 as we go through this timeline, that's what the Next Generation Science Standards were approximately on. Then, at that point, in April, different professional development or opportunities or things like that were going to be put in. Some of that work was done, some of it wasn't able to be completed as we had hoped. So here are some of the things that kind of came into play with that. First of all, when the standards were going to originally be released in November, that was put on hold a little bit because the Common Core group, specifically the CCSSO, the Chief Council State Supervisor Organization, they wanted to make sure that those content literacy pieces were embedded. So they put that on pause. They did get it embedded, and it's embedded, I think, based on the public feedback and review, especially even from Jim and that SASE team, did a pretty good job and made it seamless. So that work was then done, which kind of delayed all these different timelines to the point where the standards weren't even released until this August?
September 17th.
September 17th. And when they were released, they were only then, because of the Common Core debate in Lansing, only released through that National Council of Social Studies website. That is the place you can find them. So NCSS is where they live. And basically the document was very similar to what had been out there in the late spring, early summer. Even though it was fall, they just put some fancy graphics and a nice little package together as to how the standards are out. So it's a prettier layout. As I mentioned, the Next Generation Science Standards will be the next to be adopted. We do have updates on Lansing. The Common Core debate has been decided in that the Common Core state standard monies can be spent on the standard work and curriculum work around the standards. So that's good news. The next priority then is the Next Generation Science Standards. In the meantime, a side-by-side priority, if you will, is the concept of that Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, which my understanding, again, of a couple weeks ago was that has been tabled till December. There is still concern around the Smarter Balanced assessment. So there's still concern around that, and that's still being worked through the legislation. So even when it came out and Common Core was good and we could spend money on that, assessment was kept separate. So the Common Core and curriculum and standard work could be done, but assessment is on hold at least till December.
Can you say what the concerns are?
I think it's the same concerns as it was for the whole package before, meaning the homeschooler, the non-publics, and other things are concerned that they're going to have to there's other things beside this, but some of the big sticking points are is that it's a federal movement, it should be local control. That's one big component. Another is, if that's the assessment, will teachers be expected to teach to that assessment, and what will that look like, and what implications will that have? I think the biggest groups that are making the most noise are more of the homeschool and non-publics, getting the ear of their legislators to say, why are we conforming to these different things? But it really comes down to political lines, typically. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, there's a major group of
Yes.
folks
Yes.
that will not let it happen because they are married to the ACT.
Well, right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's going to be really hard to
Yeah.
combat
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. You can use, yeah, that's even another layer. That's a whole other thing behind the scene, the ACT piece and their suite. And I think I might have talked about this before, but understand early on, ACT and Pearson and all the assessment organizations were at the table around Smarter Balanced. But I think the proverbial writing on the wall became recognized, and ACT has pulled away and kind of created their own variation. It's called ACT, I believe it's Aspire. Yeah. And so you're going to have, I might reference this, and I actually talked to Anthony Fitzpatrick about this when he was out, and he's a social studies person that came to Coopersville, and I know some of you were able to attend that. I talked to him at lunch about this, and I said, I think if we go back and if you just Googled Alabama and the Common Core and the path they followed, I think we're kind of in that same boat where, except Alabama was away from Common Core, and then when the assessment, they pulled out of the assessment within the week, they picked up ACT and ACT Aspire. And one of the articles I read had to do with the fact that one of the Board of Ed people had connections, like it always goes with ACT. So there's some political fun going on with ACT. And there's some of that's in our legislation, which we could work around based on the way things are written, meaning it doesn't have to happen on the MME day. You could do it on Saturday. I mean, there's lots of ways to work around what the legislation says and still be true to the legislation. But I don't think that those political things are worked out yet, which is why that's still being talked through.
So ACT isn't necessarily lobbying to keep ACT within the state for testing?
I don't know that as a fact, but
They are.
so.
Is the ACT Aspire, is that one of the tests that, like based on how a kid answers the question, the next questions
It-
are related to?
It actually is not adaptive.
Because didn't the legislature pass
It did.
something that says it has to be?
Well, and that's a tricky wicket, right? So that's something that is absolutely a part of this, and that's the thing that has those in the Smarter Balanced camp. And this is really crazy because one of the Michigan Assessment BA people is Joseph Martineau, and I mean, he's heavily involved with Smarter Balanced. And I'm sure he's navigating this politically because he has to, but he's heavily involved in Smarter. And I know he knows a lot about it, and so I'm sure this is driving him crazy, but I don't know what he'd say to that. But absolutely. And those are the kinds of things that still exist that might keep Smarter Balanced around. But it looks like, I think I've heard just recently from even my boss, that either way it looks like now ACT will move, MEAP or whatever it is, based on how this legislative stuff works out, will still be in the spring. So it looks like we will not get a surprise, and this is the 3rd through 8th grade group. It looks like things will still move to the spring. That's what I'm hearing out of MDE, so that at least will move to the spring. Now, what is the assessment? Is it a MEAP? It has to be something. So will it be a MEAP variation? Will it be ACT Aspire? Will it be Smarter Balanced? And ACT Aspire, to clarify for you, is a 3rd through 8th grade assessment that kids can individually take. The other piece is it has to be online. It has to be online and it has to be adaptive. ACT Aspire is online, but it's not adaptive. That is a point.